Yeah, so now we are live. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture 3 of Heroes of Freedom series. Here today we have Mr. Yash, who is going to take the lecture on economics and human flourishing. So, sir, please start.
Okay, hey everyone. Yeah. So, the way I was planning to give this talk is I'm assuming that the audience here for this talk already has some more background than the average person. Nonetheless, I like to start things at the very beginning and give a context for what I'm trying to do here. So here is, let's say, the context, right? I come across this problem a lot in libertarian slash classical liberal circles where, let's say, someone comes and asks, hey, where can I start? Like, how do I learn more about your philosophy and your ideology? And then people say, oh yeah, read Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. Or like, some huge thing by Rothbard or something, right? And to me, I don't think that's the best approach because you're probably going to overwhelm the other person and they'll just not come look at it again. So for a long time I was spending some time trying to figure out what is the minimum possible argument that I need to make to lay out the essentials of why it is both moral and practical to, let's say, be a classical liberal or a libertarian or an objectivist. So this is the end result of that kind of approach, let's say. So the way I'm planning this is I'm only going to do the first. Let's say I have two presentations. The first one I'll do the quick version of it, and if there's enough questions and interest on it, I'll elaborate on it further, or else I'll then go on to the second presentation. All right. So if we look at almost all of human history, almost everyone was nearly like living in abject poverty. And this only started to change in the last 200 years or so, let's say around the Industrial Revolution. So the share of
Can you
world,
increase screen size? Can you increase that?
is this better? Or
Yeah, yeah.
okay, good, yeah. So the share of population living in extreme poverty, just from 1820 to, let's say, around present day, it went down from about 80% to close to like a little under 10%. So this has huge consequences for people in terms of their health, their average height, the opportunities that they have, uh, you know everything you can imagine. So so why is this, right? Now, again, remember that I'm giving this talk in a way that, if someone asks you this question, this is the way that you can sort of give a quick response, right? So we get two clues by looking at this data. One is that we see that freedom leads to prosperity. So countries with higher degrees of freedom lead to higher degrees of prosperity. But we have to define our terms very carefully. So by freedom here, I don't mean freebies. I mean like legal protection of each person and their private property against plunder or coercion or like the initiation of violence or fraud by other people. And then what is prosperity? Prosperity doesn't just mean like green pieces of paper, it means the abundance of life enriching goods and services. So the first clue we have is okay, maybe this is just a coincidence, but countries with higher freedom tend to have countries with higher levels of prosperity. Okay, so that's one clue. And then we also have another clue, which is countries with higher levels of prosperity lead to higher levels of flourishing. So why does this matter? Because you have a certain mindset of people who sort of underestimate the importance of a higher GDP per capita simply because it's not a perfect measure. And it's true that it's not a perfect measure, but nonetheless, it's good enough that when you get the real GDP per capita across countries, then you get to see that, the higher it is, the better the average human development index in that country, by which I mean like a long and healthy life, better education, and a higher standard of living. So we have these two clues, and if this is not just a coincidence, then it gives us a simple, let's say, formula that higher freedom leads to higher prosperity, and higher prosperity leads to higher flourishing, and ultimately this higher flourishing is why anything matters. So at an individual level as well, it is only if you want to live and flourish that you need to do anything else. If you decide not to live and flourish, You don't need to do anything else. That is the default path that your life will take. Okay, so is this just a coincidence, or is there a causal mechanism behind this? So what is the simplest way that we can like sort of establish this argument, right? So well, let's look at some of the possible means by which you can acquire some wealth. And again, here by wealth, I mean life enriching goods and services. So if you try to create all the wealth in your life yourself from a pencil to an airplane, obviously none of us can do that. So if you're trying to be self-sufficient and being an isolationist and not dealing at all with other people, you're obviously going to be extremely poor. So that can't be the answer. Well, what if you just rely on charity to get it from other people through their generosity? So, in this case as well, first the wealth had to be created before it can be distributed. And this doesn't lead to any creation of wealth, simply a transfer of wealth through voluntary means. And then, of course, like if you steal it from someone, even then it's only transfer of wealth, but it's actually worse because it discourages future wealth production. So, if you take from everyone who's above average and give to everyone who is below average, and you punish someone who's above average to the degree that they're above average and give it to someone who is like below average, then over time you lower the incentive for people to be above average. You can imagine this very simply even in a classroom setting where everyone gets the average grade. Eventually everyone just stops working, right? So clearly this is also not a path to creating wealth. Well, then there's only one option left, which is you do what you're better at, I do what I'm better at, and then we trade. So by mutual consent to mutual benefit, right? This ability to sort of focus on one specialization and then trade with other people who specialize in other things, this is the only mechanism by which wealth can be created. Everything else in economics is has to not contradict this basic fact. And the reason I point this out is a lot of the academic economics and let's say non-libertarian economics, it actually blatantly does ignore this fact, or very in a subtle way does ignore this fact. So if specialization in trade is the only path to creating wealth, if this is true, then every trade barrier is a path to poverty. So so plunder and self-sufficiency both lead to lower productivity and lead to poverty, whereas specialization in trade is the only way for us to move from poverty to prosperity. So I hope that most of these things would be sort of not that difficult for our current audience, but nonetheless, any questions are welcome. And let's just talk a minute about like what is the nature of value, right? So we now determined that specialization in trade is how we create wealth. Wealth means valuable things, but like what is value? So value is not in the substance itself or in the labor that goes into producing something. Like if there's a t-shirt out there with a photograph of Karl Marx, I'm not interested. But if the same t-shirt out there with a photograph of Ayn Rand or Ludwig von Mises, I'd be willing to buy it, right? So it's clearly not the labor that went into it, or the t-shirt itself, but it's a relationship between me as the subject and the t-shirt as an object that gives it wealth. So everyone in society has their different preferences and priorities, and they want different things in different amounts. So essentially, that is the simple way of saying that wealth is subjective and marginal. Marginal meaning that you want a certain units of certain thing, but after that you don't need as much of it. And with every unit, your need for having one more of it is slightly lower. So that is the nature of value. It's not in the thing, it's not in the labor that went into producing that thing, but it's a relationship between the person benefiting from the thing and the thing itself. All right. So here now at an aggregate level, we are not talking about just one person and their values. We're talking about an entire society and the aggregate of the values of like millions and billions of people, right? So how can we even get a sense of what people value? Like any kind of computation necessary to sort of get, imagine we have millions and billions of people who use millions and billions of things in different amounts. So how should a society figure out what to produce, how to produce, and how much of it to produce. And that is exactly what the free market system solves brilliantly. So, as a quick recap of that, let's say, or a quick explanation of that, prices communicate information and incentives both to producers of things and to consumers of things without the need of any central authority that does anything other than just protect the freedom of people, which is like their right to their private property and their life. So now imagine that you have an examination season coming up and that creates a higher demand for pencils. Due to this higher demand for pencils, there's going to be an increase in the price of pencils. Now, think of it from a societal point of view. What we want to do is there is a higher demand of something, the supply hasn't increased yet. So at this time, what we want people to do is, hey, use this resource very carefully. Don't use it if you don't really want it or don't really need it at the moment. And at the same time, you want to send a signal to other people saying you will greatly benefit if you can increase the supply of this quantity right now, because that would be doing the rest of us a big favor. And this is exactly what the price system achieves. It tells the consumer indirectly through simply the price being higher that they'll save more if they don't buy it right now. So maybe they can maybe they can delay buying this resource when it's not as scarce. And at the same time, it sends a message to the producers saying if you produce and sell more, you will benefit more now through higher profits. So this same signal has a different meaning for different people in the market. And there's no way to sort of replicate this in a centralized manner where we can compute all of the moving preferences of everyone involved and deliver without shortages or excess wastages. So even though the producer and consumer are both only motivated by their own self-interest, what they do is also like mutually beneficial and socially beneficial. And so in a line, the profit and loss system is used for supply to track changes in demand or for supply and demand to match each other, basically. So the more we distort this pricing system through trade barriers or like plunder, which is any violation of or taking your things away from you without your consent, then the less accurate that price system becomes, the price signal becomes, it's more distorted. And here we have Adam Smith's classic quote: "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Okay, so let me also emphasize another aspect over here, right? One of the biggest barriers that people have mentally to accepting libertarian economics or any kind of ethics that says, hey, it's good to improve your life, right? They immediately assume that a consequence of that is that you will mistreat other people. But if you unpack the consequences of what we have quickly discussed right now, it is impossible for you to improve your life in the long run while mistreating other people. You simply must engage in win-win interactions with other people so that you can keep on producing the valuable things that you require to flourish in your life. So until you diffuse that fear that people have in their mind that giving people freedom or letting them improve their life is simply a gateway to them exploiting other people, they're going to have a high degree of resistance to adopting freedom or like being okay with the idea of individual liberty. Okay, we now described how the free market solves this problem. Now here I have a summary of Ludwig von Mises's argument that a centrally planned economy simply cannot solve this problem, which is what known as the calculation problem. Now again, as a recap, the calculation problem is for a society to understand what to produce, how to produce, and how much of it to produce. So every line in this argument is important, and so we can come back to it in the Q&A if necessary, but it's a very tight argument. So without private property, there cannot be any specialization and trade. Because for me to trade things with you, I need to be the owner of that thing, right? So that is itself means that a system of private property is essential before any of this can take off the ground. Without trade, there are no prices. So a price simply emerges when there are a number of buyers and sellers in the market, and based on the total supply and demand, you get an aggregate which moves up and down based on variation in supply and demand, right? So without trade, you simply cannot have prices. Price is not an arbitrary number that you can put into things. It contains valuable information and incentives. And then without prices, then supply cannot track changes in demand. So if supply cannot track changes in demand because there is no incentive for people to match the supply with the demand, then what happens? Well, if it doesn't match, then you either have a shortage or you have, let's say, an excess or a surplus or a wastage. But keep in mind that an excess of one thing is nothing but the shortage of n number of other things because the resources could have been put to better use. So we can simply say that when supply doesn't track changes in demand, we have shortages of something, right? And when that happens, then that is the cycle that eventually leads to the mass shortages, starvation, and deaths that we see in centrally planned economies like socialist and capitalist and fascist economies. So with this background, we can now give sort of in our maybe in our own words or like in sort almost correct words, but the proper definition of capitalism and socialism. I say in our own words because I actually don't like the standard textbook definition sometimes, and they're clearly not written by capitalists. So capitalism, we can say, is a political system in which the only legitimate purpose of government is to protect people and their private property, which is nothing but capital, against the initiation of force or fraud by others, including members of the government itself. And of course, like socialism is a system where they reject private ownership of means of production. I say this instead of a centrally planned economy necessarily because you could also reject it simply through the means of anarcho-communism where you don't have a centralized body. I don't know how they reach that stage. I don't think they can, except for society just completely disintegrating. But nonetheless, whether it's in a tyrannical centrally planned economy or in a anarcho-communist economy, they're rejecting private ownership of the means of production of factories and machineries and all the capital goods and so on. So it's effectively, if you think about it, capitalism is a system that is anti-plunder and socialism is a system that completely legalizes plunder. So one completely fair question that you should expect and perhaps you have as well is why should we pick between pure capitalism and pure socialism? Like how about a middle ground? And the answer to that, we can elaborate on this in the next part of the talk, but the answer to that is there is no steady middle ground between no plunder and universal plunder. That middle ground is some plunder. But as soon as you accept some plunder, you have already accepted the conditions that violate private property, and it leads to a slippery slope that progressively leads to universal plunder. So if I think I covered a little bit of this before, but like when one person is robbed to pay another person, both of them are discouraged from producing in the future. Like the first person because his productivity is punished. So why should I keep on producing if I don't get to keep what I have worked to produce? And the second person thinks, why should I produce if I'm getting things for free anyway? And so imagine at a societal level if there are two groups, right? There are the makers and the takers, right? It's not that everyone who is a maker will be tempted to stop being a maker, right? But one more person will jump the ship, and then the people who are simply free riding becomes slightly more in number, and that becomes a higher burden for one more person. This is like, oh, this is too much, I can't take it. And so at the margin you have people who simply cannot take the pressure of all the other free riders that they're having to lift. And as you encourage this middle ground, you essentially plunder breeds until it harms everyone. So that is why we come to the central principle that almost I would say all libertarians tend to agree with, which is like the simple rule to establish a society is like do not steal and do not ask the government to steal on your behalf, which is a non-aggression principle if you're familiar with that, and expect the government to make all plunder illegal and remove all trade barriers. And I don't think this audience needs help to understand why this talk matters because you're here, or why this topic matters. but it's a very genuine question that people have, that, hey, Yash, you just talked about specialization in trade. This is not my specialization. Why should I bother with it? Why can't economists take care of it? And the short answer to that is because they might have real or perceived conflict of interests. I would say they are only perceived conflict of interest. They are actually harming themselves in the long run. But as long as they believe those conflicts, they will operate accordingly. So, and even if they offered honest advice to politicians, the leader of any country can only move in the direction that the majority of its people is willing to tolerate. And this we have known since ancient times, not just in democracies. Like even kings feared not upsetting their population too much, because then there would be a violent revolution to overthrow them. Or, and in a democracy we do it in a civil way where we don't need the revolution, we just have a ballot box and we vote accordingly to replace the leader. And so even if a good policy is passed, if the majority of the people think that that's a bad policy, they will either put pressure on the leader to revert it, or they will change the leader who will come and revert it. So, economics and philosophy are fields that simply are not, should not be considered in their entirety as specialized knowledges. Rather, it is the foundation on which specialization is even possible. So, if you value the fact that, like, you don't have to do everything in life yourself, which would consequently mean you do nothing, then you have to put time and effort not just to build in your specialization, but to protect the foundation that makes that specialization possible, right? So I think this part is not that relevant for this audience, but let's say, the simple thing that you can do is be more active. Don't get into fight with people, but learn to communicate your ideas and try to influence people around you to adopt this mindset, which I know this group is already doing. So, uh, I just want to, like, emphasize that one thing, that you are like, you're a center of a network. So don't think that just because you're not a popular person that it doesn't matter. So if you imagine that maybe 1% of the people have economic literacy today, right? If you try hard enough, in 2 years maybe you can at least convince two more people, right? And so if you take that from 1% to 2% to 4%, you're basically going to see that in a decade or in 15 years, if everyone actually did even that much, then we could have like near 100% or over 90% literacy. Of course, I'm making it sound simpler than it is, but it also not as hard as people think. And because they think it's so hard, they don't even try. So I'm gonna pause here, and we can take some questions, and we can take the discussion forward from there.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the economic calculation problem. Like
Hey, Himanshu, yeah.
yeah, so many socialists say that why can't you replace price system with just democratic voting? Like you can ask the customers what they want and you can just produce it and plan it centrally.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So here is the thing, right? It sounds good, one person, one vote, but voting, first of all, should, so first of all, like, let's realize that we are all voting with our wallets in a market, right? And every time you go buy something, you are voting for it as opposed to other things. And suppose we have this democratic election, right? How often are we supposed to have that? For what subgroup? And do all groups have knowledge of all products? I may like certain things. I'm very not. I'm very interested in those things, and I'm not interested in like Gucci bags, or like a bunch of other, let's say, like um, fast or like styling products and stuff, right? So nor am I willing to like put my money where my mouth is, so to speak. So in a system where you have to put your money on saying, hey, this is what I'm willing to buy, what that means is I'm not just asking from society, I'm actually saying, hey, this money that I have, it is an IOU. It is something that I already worked for, I already delivered value to society, and now I'm asking for it in return. So that is how the price system is incentivizing producers at the same time that it is incentivizing consumers, right? If you have this one person, one vote kind of a system, that's also including people who are not actually contributing to society. So that's just saying I want something. Well, okay, so what? But the point is who is willing to work for it, right? So I would say that that's the first step that you can take at trying to answer that question.
Yeah, I have one more question. Like one more attack on economic calculation problem is they say that Walmart is a good example of centrally planned system.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's such a yeah. I've heard that. Yeah. Understand. So there's this bad that type of thinking or context dropping. Like it's a fallacy, which is like you ignore the context in which a certain thing is operating. Right. Walmart exists in a system of semi respect for private property. It uses the price signals available in the market to buy its inputs and then sell its outputs. What they are dropping is this entire context, and they're focusing on the fact that within Walmart there's a hierarchy of people, starting from a CEO down to the person who works on the floor. And they're saying, hey, look, this is just a centrally planned system. And it's really not. Every decision that Walmart is making is boxed in by this entire price system at its inputs and its outputs. And in that competitive environment where there's not just Walmart, there's also Target and so on and so forth, right? In that environment where it doesn't have guaranteed customers, and it has a competition, and it has these price signals, it is only there when it delivers better or cheaper products that consumers are interested in.
Yeah. So one more question. Uh, how do you differentiate? Like many people say, cronyism is capitalism, the next stage of capitalism. So how do you say that it's a wrong proposition?
Uh, can you hold on to that, because in the next presentation I have a diagram that will help me answer that, how to visualize
Oh,
that.
okay. Cool.
Okay, yeah, but that's a good question.
Yeah, do we have time for the second presentation?
If not, then I'll just jump to that slide and I'll just talk about
Yeah,
this
let's
question
jump to
then.
the slide.
Okay, all right. Give me a second. Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay, is this readable enough? Are
I'm
you are you
still
seeing
seeing the
a
what
slide
can
that
you do? What can you do? I'm seeing that
is it? Okay, I have to stop sharing and share something else now. Okay. How about now? Are you seeing this slippery slope type
yes,
slide up there?
yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. So we don't have enough time, obviously, but this is sort of like, just to build. I mean, anyway, so I'm being very clear with my terminology here in the presentation, but we're just skipping to a particular slide. So by capitalism, I mean a system that has one job for the government, which is to protect individual rights, to protect people and their property against coercion, including coercion from members of the government itself, right? So in logic, you have this law of excluded middle, right? So either something is A or it's not A. So everything that is not this strict definition that I'm talking about is anti-capitalism. It's not capitalism. Now, that doesn't mean that all of this is the same. What you have is a progressive slope towards what Karl Marx wanted in the Communist Manifesto, which is like the complete abolition of private property, right? So, cronyism by definition is when some form of plunder is legalized. There is some aspect of the government taking from people, taking from one group through taxes, through fees or whatever, and giving it to some other group. Everything else is just, let's say, like trying to like sugarcoat this fact. But it is only so by capitalism, I'm talking about system of like zero legal plunder, right? As soon as you have any legal plunder, even in a fuller presentation, I would say that I am against any kind of taxes. It should be a completely voluntary contribution to the government type of a model, but that's for a different conversation sometime. But as soon as you have any kind of plunder, you then create the environment for more plunder to take place. Like suppose you put tariffs on steel, right? Let's say some steel industry wanted to get this crony favor from the government that, hey, let's protect me from this international competition. So if you put tariff on steel, now that is going to make it more expensive to make automobiles in the country. So not only did the price of steel go up for the consumers, now that affects also the producers of automobiles. And now either they will have difficulty running their business, or they will also demand that, hey, if you're protecting steel, please also protect us. And now they'll also have a tariff on automobiles. And then that makes all the transportation more expensive. And then that makes all the bunch of other industries less competitive, and then they might demand their protection and so forth. So you see, like in very quick pattern, how once you allow any even a single bit of poison in your food poisons the whole food, right? So that's the nature of plunder. It grows like a cancer if you don't treat it immediately, or like if you don't resolve to eradicate it completely. So you can't accept any middle ground. And especially I would say, stop calling it crony capitalism. This is a unfortunate terminology that both capitalists and socialists use. Everything bad they'll prefix into capitalism, and they'll just spoil the name of capitalism. So like, crony capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, or they'll refer to the Soviet Union as state capitalism. Like, come on. So you, at least we shouldn't be playing into those hands. Yeah.
I know we have less time maybe for the next lecture if we plan. But regarding the tariff thing, then many people say that China is basically subsidizing the steel industry, and that's why they are like able to sell cheap steel. So why shouldn't we put tariff and to protect our industries? Because that will destroy the steel industries in our country. So creating loss of jobs and all.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll keep one part of that aside, which is like the let's say the genuine security threat that one might argue China possesses. But let's assume that's not the case. We are simply talking on economic protectionism terms here. If the other government is subsidizing some product and giving it to us at a cheaper price, that just means that you're benefiting, and you shouldn't be you shouldn't be trying to like get rid of that benefit in that sense. It's a mistake that they're making. They're giving away too much for too little. It's their taxpayers that are paying the brunt for it. But you should make use of that. I think there's a brilliant clip by Milton Friedman where he explains this. I think you can find it if you try to look for it. But China subsidizing some, let's say, steel or some other commodity is not a reason for other countries also to fall into that kind of a trap. And Frederick Bastiat actually has this great story of the petition of the candlestick makers, where he gives this analogy, right? Like, there's a bunch of candle makers who come and petition that, hey, we have unfair competition from someone who we simply cannot outperform. Like, they're giving away their services for practically free, and our industry will be ruined as a result of that. And who is that someone? It's the sun. They're talking about light in the day, right? So a protectionist would argue that, hey, if we could block the sun completely, wouldn't we encourage our candle making industry so much more, right? Or in the modern day, you would have some other like light industry or whatever. So my point is, the aim of a person or the aim of an economy is not employment as an end in itself. It is to enjoy the prosperity that comes from it. So you could have full employment of people simply like digging roads and filling roads up again, but that's not leading you to any higher level of prosperity. So keep in mind, so that's sort of like a Keynesian trap of like, oh, hey, what we care about is full employment. No, the form of employment will change. Let's proceed towards trying to get full productivity, and that will lead to full voluntary employment. Meaning, like if someone wants to retire early, then that doesn't mean that they have to go and work. But everyone who is out there looking for a job will have some or the other kind of job available for them to tailor their skills towards.
Yeah, I had these many questions only.
Yeah,
Uh,
great question, Himanshu. Yeah.
Thanks. So if the other Himanshu Singh wants to ask some question, he can go ahead. Himanshu Singh, you are on mute. If you have no questions, you can basically inform us.
I guess not.
Yeah, I think he doesn't have any questions.
Okay, so
Maybe you can comment or
yeah,
DM.
closing remarks, please.
Yeah.
Oh, from me? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think I think it's extremely important for us to try to come up with our own version of this minimal necessary argument. Even then, of course, it'll be like several hours long if you want to elaborate on every single edge case. That is something that I'm working on in the background, but let's get out of this mindset that we can just expect people to read some Mises, or frankly, people today can't even understand Frederick Bastiat or Henry Hazlitt, right? So if we want to if we want to live in the world that we like, which is a world that respects individual rights, then we simply must get out of this mindset that I have seen many libertarians have, which is they use it sort of like as a bragging session that, hey, yeah, I've read thick books, like, and it doesn't matter, like, good for you, you read thick books, but the point is, was that your end goal, or is your end goal to encourage more economic and philosophical literacy so that you get to enjoy the benefits of living in that society? So I hope that is the mindset shift that people can take away from this session.
Okay, so thank you, Yash. Thank you for the remarks. It was really insightful. Although we were short of time, still got to learn a lot of things and understand new ways of arguing our case for libertarian economics.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tushar. I appreciate this forum. And yeah, I should just tell the audience that I think we ran a little late because of issues on my side. So hopefully we'll try to like keep that in check next time.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, like, I hope to have further collaboration with you guys. Yeah.
With please stay after the I close the recording, and thank you all for joining. See you all next week. Goodbye.